Hello, Helen and Therese. It's nice to see you in Estonia. And as you're quite new for us, I assume you haven't been exhibiting, or maybe it's even your first time to visit Estonia. So it would be nice if you could introduce yourself a bit for Estonian audience. What is your background? Where did you study? What is your cultural background? And how did you end up finding your way to jewelry?
My name's Helen Clara Hemsley, and I was born in South Africa, and ended up in England and then in Scotland, and studied textiles and fine art at Glasgow School of Art. And then I ended up moving to Denmark because I met a Danish man, and there I started making jewelry and started studying at the institute. I think that's kind of it.
Mm-hmm. I'm Therese Mørch, and I also am in Denmark. I live in Copenhagen, and I studied jewelry in London and stayed there for most of a decade, and I moved back to Copenhagen a decade ago. And I grew up in Denmark with a sort of mixed background, but on a very sort of historical side in terms of arts and crafts. So, yeah.
Yeah, usually when we are doing these interviews, we go and visit the studio of the artist, but as it's a little bit too expensive to ship all the people who are interested in your works to Denmark, then maybe you can please little bit describe your everyday surrounding. What is filling your days, how your workshop looks like, where do you work?
Yeah, well, I live mostly in Copenhagen, but I also live in Svendborg, which is a little city on the sort of middle island of Denmark, where my partner lives. So I'm there a bit, and there I have a little goldsmith studio. And then when I'm in Copenhagen, then I have a little corner of my living room, which is where I work. And that's because I've tried different scenarios. I've tried to have workshops and stuff, but because I also travel, well, before Corona, I traveled a lot, and I also curate a lot of exhibitions. It just, I end up only using these studios like one day a week. So I decided that it was just better to work from home, and I like working from home. And what was more, and every day, I mean, it's very different. It depends on if I'm working on my own work. I mean, some days I kind of work, I'll be making my pieces the whole day. Other times I'll be going to meetings, or when I'm curating, I'm of course on the computer a lot, writing to artists. A big part of my time is spent with funding. Write a lot of funding applications actually, and contact, but also trying to keep up, especially after Corona, where we didn't get out and see a lot of exhibitions. Trying to somehow keep in contact with contemporaries and other artists. So, yeah.
I have a bit more of a traditional setting in the sense that I've got a bench in town, but also in a shared workshop and boutique setting. So I have that part of my work which is a bit more commercial and a bit more sort of traditionally jewelry driven, and then for all the sort of more artistic and experimental work, I do a lot of work from home, and also in that workshop, but also I will go other places and sit and work in situations that I might decide on that specific day or that project. And I also do a lot of fundraising, and I'm finding there's a lot of admin work that's not so much fun to talk about, but it still takes up quite a bit of our practices. So yeah, that's my setup.
One Estonian artist once said that when you're asking right questions for yourself, then it doesn't actually matter what kind of medium you're working in. Is it jewelry or is it painting? But I would like to know why you decided to work with jewelry, and why especially jewelry and not painting. Why not rocks? Why not sculpture? Yeah, why jewelry?
For me, it was the sort of accessibility of the medium. So and the sort of very sort of obvious connection between the body and this medium, and there's also this sense of sentimentality or easy access to that whole emotional perspective that people might have with, or like relationship with jewelry. So that doesn't mean to say that I wouldn't work in sculpture or wouldn't work in any other sort of medium, but it just seems fitting that jewelry is my main sort of focus.
I've done a lot of different things and still also work with pottery at the moment. And I'm terrible at painting. So I had this idea at one point that it was very romantic and tried to paint. But I'm just not good at painting. Drawing, I draw a lot. I also use my sketchbook a lot. So I think a lot of my stuff is very much founded in that. And with jewelry, it kind of found me, which sounds very distant, but I worked a lot with the body when I was doing fine art and worked with performance and video back in the 90s when that was like really new and it was still analog video. And that was very much about the body and personal experience and being a woman and later on being a mother and all these things that were based on a very feminine perspective and a very personal perspective. And it's a bit like what you say. I mean, jewelry is it's a sentimental documentation. And I think my scale hasn't changed that much because when I made objects in the sculpture department, they were this big. And now when I make jewelry, they're kind of, this big. So I haven't really challenged myself that much there.
When I saw your pieces on the window, it instantly reminded 5 topics and materials of the second wave feminist movement. You probably are aware. All those textile materials and also techniques like weaving, stitching. Also the topics, vulnerability, domestic situations, and so on. So do you see connected to that, or how do you explain why do you have those kinds of topics and materials in your creation?
Should I start?
Yeah.
I kind of chuckled when I read that question because when I was studying, my role models were Carolee Sheeman and Judy Chicago and Hannah Wilkes and Marina Abramovich and Valley Export and all those women that more or less were second wave feminists. And so I think that stayed with me because they also use their bodies and their personal experience in their work. And in terms of materials, they also had this kind of everyday way of tackling things around them and using ready-made objects and stuff like that. So I think for me, it's always been there. And it just makes sense for me to use the things around me also because I do have a very sustainable practice where I very, very rarely buy anything. And to the extent that now I've actually made a whole series where it's based on the things that I've collected and saved over time. So I think that really fits in there. And also because I think it's important to focus on these traditional female techniques like stitching and weaving and knitting and give them new life because they've got just as much potential as any other material. It's how you use them and what story you want to tell with them, I think. So.
Yeah, I can attest to that. But from my perspective, I think a lot of the sort of more like for this exhibition, Traces in Time, it's been like the textile work of mine has kind of developed as a soft touch added to my already way of working, or I don't know how to say it, but it's been more like an addition that's added an extra layer to some of my work in terms of I mean, I've become a mother within the last 5 years of 2 kids, and there's a lot of domesticity, you know, in relation to that you suddenly have to be able to take on soft sides. You have to be able to make do with what you've got, and you have to be able to accept your condition regardless. And so this has been one way for me to develop work according to who I now am, as opposed to before. But then there's also, you can say, like, there's the transformation of the materials, because I also have some cast bronze and some glass work in there, which I wouldn't call sort of like domestic materials. They're more sort of traditional sculptural materials. But then they're dealing with touch and sensitivity and creating presence through that. So I don't know if that answers the question, but there's something going on there in the sensitivity kind of way.
How did you find each other? Because there's much more jewelry artists in Denmark. And was it the topics? Was it the materials? Was it just the spark of each other's personality? Yeah.
Yeah.
Influence each other somehow?
Yeah.
I remember when you came back from London. I knew who Therese was, but she'd been away. And then I remember that I heard she came back, and then we were invited to Current Obsession came to Denmark and wanted to interview some Danish jewelry makers. And someone, Mette Sorby, who's one of sort of mothers of contemporary jewelry in Copenhagen, she invited some of us to the gallery. And that was the first time I actually met Therese. And I think it was kind of two-sided, because you were just as happy to see me. I felt it.
Yeah. That's 10 years ago.
Yeah, that's 10 years ago. And we've only started working together recently.
We worked together. But then we kind of found each other, and then there was this sort of sense that at some point we need to play.
Yeah.
And then we did connected exhibitions, which were like a trilogy of 3 shows in Copenhagen, Munich, and Glasgow. And that was in 2016, 17. So,
but that was also with others. Yeah. So it wasn't just us of playing.
But it was still a sort of joint curatorial effort. And,
that's true.
And from then on, it's been like this. We're not done yet.
No. And we also have another project, which is called A-Galerii. Yeah. Which is kind of funny, because it's a window exhibition concept. And that's why we applied for this in A-Galerii, because we thought, okay, this is kind of a path in a way, because we're doing it in Copenhagen, and then we saw the open call for a window exhibition in Tallinn, and we thought, okay, that really suits us well. So
yeah.
And then I think in terms of subject matter, that it's also a really good match, because we speak the same language in terms of.
There's that sense of biographical, sort of like we're not too afraid of revealing stuff about ourselves, or using that as starting points in our work. I think that's, and in very different ways.
Very different ways, yeah.
You're talking about window exhibitions, and that you're interested more in window exhibiting. And first, I would like to ask why, especially windows, because it's something in between private and public area. And right now, when you're in Tallinn, of course, you found the hotspot of public space because there's a lot of big protests behind your pieces right now, behind the window. For the people who are looking it from the video, you have to say that right now there's this war in Ukraine and the exhibition takes place next to Russian embassy. So every day there's huge protests behind also A-Galerii windows because we're so close to the Russian embassy. So why window? Is it the way of communication that you like, or what way window communicates more than just the space inside the gallery?
So there's different things to say about that. I mean, the whole idea of doing the window gallery was because I used to be in a studio where there was an empty window. And we wanted to do something with that window. And it was during COVID, so it made total sense to do an exhibition there and to actually create a space there for contemporary jewelry. That was like the main sort of...
and then I had done that with an exhibition that couldn't be held because of COVID in March, April.
Beige.
Beige. So and that we put a whole exhibition into a window that should have been created, but in a different way. So I think we got a taste for it that it worked, and because the response was huge, and the social media activity around beige was very big because there were so many people going for walks the whole time. So we also thought, okay, we can really reach a lot of people and different people, a whole different audience.
It was a lot about reaching out to different audiences and not just contemporary jewelry for jewelers and for people in the knowing, but to actually see if you could reach out.
And it I mean, as far as I can see, it works.
Yeah.
And also because people, sometimes when we've been outside the spaces where someone comes by and they ask you, are you involved with this? And you get a totally different dialogue going than if you were standing inside a gallery talking to people that came in through the door.
Yeah.
It's because it's unexpected, I think, a lot of the times. They don't really know they're going to walk past this. In terms of the fact that these windows are right next to the Russian embassy, of course, we didn't know that. And we only discovered it on Thursday when we got here, when we went for a walk. And at first didn't even notice the gallery because there was a protest in front of the embassy. So carried on walking and then only realized much later on that we'd gone past the gallery because we'd been, distracted by this protest. So it kind of has put it in a totally different context from the beginning.
Yeah.
Also because we traveled knowing that there was a war and relatively close. So I think we've talked about it a lot. We've also talked to other people about it. It's been very
present.
Yeah, very present.
You can't really deny it. And it's also, I mean, one of the things that it kind of like we've had to change the whole format of today where we were going to do this artist talk and all these things so people could go to the protest and to also accommodate for the video being filmed even or because of loud noises and all these things. But it's just once again kind of repeating this whole like the whole reason why we're doing the window shows is because of unforeseen events, which is sort of like repeating itself and kind of like following through this whole, like we couldn't come here and install the show because of COVID, and now we come to take it down, and now there's this going on. And
then so it's been Corona and Putin that have like kind of been pulling the strings.
Yeah,
in a way, in a kind of very abstract.
Jewelry traditionally is seen as a medium and material-based art, which is mostly seen as a part of contemporary craft world. And in the same time, in fine art world, we have this kind of material turn and this new wave of new materialism. And in the same time, in craft, we have this craft revival where all the methods and techniques and materials that crafters usually used has been taken over also from a lot of people from fine art who doesn't connect at all with the world of contemporary craft. Clay, pottery, textile, making carpets, using glass blowing. It's at the moment most popular materials and techniques for sculptors right now. But how do you feel this? I don't want to say conflict, but this relationship of craft and fine art.
We talked about it a lot yesterday.
Yeah.
And how do you position yourself also?
Yeah.
Say again, sorry.
How do you position yourself? Yeah. Do you feel a need to position yourself in this question, or you're looking at it from distance?
Yeah, I'm not too concerned, to be honest, because I feel that, you know, I don't, like, I work in so many different ways, and I want to preserve the right to work sculpturally or in a fine art context, being a maker, knowing my materials, knowing how to make stuff, but also working as a designer. So for me, it's very fluid, and I personally would feel restricted having to make that sort of like a segregation. So like what we talked about was a bit more that it was also sometimes craftspeople tend to impose that presumption onto fine arts people, and vice, like it's just a weird like I know a lot of artists who may not really understand what I'm doing, but they also may not be very interested in it, and so when they then do show up, they kind of like, oh, I get it, and then it sort of like seeps into their contextual awareness. Does that make sense? So I think that's another thing, is just like if you just carry on making and doing and spreading the sort of like the works, they will speak for you in a sense, that it doesn't have to be that complicated, I think, or divided.
No, but the thing where it is a bit of a problem is that, like in Copenhagen, for example, there's a lot more opportunities to exhibit as a visual artist than there is for the craftspeople. And also because we don't have an education anymore, and there's been loads of things that have happened over the last few years that mean that we don't have the same stronghold that we maybe had 5 years ago, 6 years ago. So that kind of makes you have to sort of place yourself somewhere in that debate. And I, for one, even though I have this classical fine art background, I also have the hands-on jewelry education. But for me, I am a maker, and that's where I place myself. I almost have this little personal thing about being called an artist. I don't want to be called a jewelry artist. I'm a jewelry maker. Even though my work's conceptual, and even though I have this, I'm rooted in a lot of fine art history, and it's about the making. It's about the process. It's about the materials. So that's where I stand.
How do you describe your process? How do you describe your methods? How do you find your way to the pieces? Do you have a specific method that you use? Do you sketch? Do you start straight from the materials?
I have a material archive, collected materials, random bits and pieces and stuff, and old sketches that I make in 3D. And then I have a lot of sort of conceptual ideas I want to explore. And they're like the building grounds of how I work. But from that and then to having an exhibition on at A-Galerii is like there's a long journey before that. But for me, it's usually pretty materials led, and it comes from an interaction with the materials and working out what they can do and how they collaborate with my thoughts at that given time. I would say, and what's been going on for me, and yeah. So it's again, it's sort of like works both ways for me.
Yeah, I suppose it does for me. I use my sketchbook a lot. I've always used my sketchbook. I've got so many sketchbooks, and also look back in them, which I haven't done for a while actually. I think I should do that. But for me, it often, because a lot of my work is very based on the titles. So sometimes I'll get a title first, and then I'll make the work around that. Other times I'll already have the idea for the work, the title comes later. But a lot of the times the words mean a lot. So they will guide me. So if I have this title in my head, then I'll be like, okay, now I need to find out which materials and which story it tells. Sometimes I experience something and I think, okay, that I have to communicate in a piece of jewelry. And then I use my sketchbook a lot also to sort of keep track, because even though I take photos of the process, a lot of times, especially the way I work with found objects and with my sort of my big box of old stuff, a lot of the pieces have had different combinations. So the ones that are hanging in the window now at A-Galerii, nearly all of them, I don't think any of them originally were planned to be that combination. So it's important for me to have my sketchbook so I can write, okay, the first time I try, it's that piece of fabric with that stone, with those wooden bits. And then, because otherwise it gets a bit confusing. So, yeah.
Yeah, and when we, in the beginning, talked about your coming of age as jewelry makers, and now we talked about process. Maybe you can share some of your key moments in your career, maybe some important people who you have met and who directed you in some specific way, or some kind of understanding on moments. So, oh yeah, that's my thing, or somebody just said something to you that really has stayed with you. Maybe you can share some experience.
Yeah. I wouldn't know where to begin. I've been very fortunate to study with the people that I was around in London for all those years, and going to Munich and see Schmuck for the first time in 2005. I went the first time, and I've been very overwhelmed throughout my student years with experiencing those people and their works, but also with developing around them. But I think in terms of we were talking about this whole, for me it's been more like standing on the shoulders of past, really. Like, I grew up in this historical site where excavations were found, and there's an old glass factory, so there's a lot of crafts and industry. And so for me, it's more like a humbleness around that whoever person created something that was dug out of the ground in my backyard. As a like, I wouldn't know who to thank for that, but it's some kind of awareness of being in a context of a very long history of people making things happen and creating life, right? So I think the people that know me know who they are and how they influence me in various ways.
So I'm going to totally name drop them.
Yeah, you can do that.
I was very lucky to have a tutorial with Marina Abranovich in 1997 or 8. And she sat across from me and she said to me, "You only have one good idea in your career." And then I was like, "Yeah, but okay, have you had your good idea yet? I mean, how do you know when you have your good idea?" She's like, "I don't know." And then I think it's kind of also suits my personality. I've been going thinking, have I had my good idea? Because I think I've had loads of good ideas. It's like, when is that good idea? And I don't know if it's maybe a distracting factor to go and think the whole time. But it's true. I think it's maybe that don't be too precious. So I don't know what her message was, because it was the shortest tutorial in the history of time. So it was like kind of she was gone. So that I've learned. And then I've also learned that you mustn't eat soap, because I did a performance with eating soap and ended up in the hospital. So that was a turning point. 2 months. Yeah. And in the jewel world, of course, I also have huge. I mean, Lucy Sarnell was really, I had the privilege of being taught by her on a workshop, and I visited her in Amsterdam, and she's someone I will never forget, her work and the way she worked and the things she said to me. She was also very bold. She wasn't scared to say, push yourself.
I would like to know, how do you function besides A-Galerii? Where can we see your pieces? Where can we see you next?
Yeah. At the moment, for me, I'm much online. So it's like, for me, it's I haven't got any exhibitions lined up over the next while, but there'll be it's mainly online at the moment. There's a lot of social media going on.
You're very good at social media.
Don't feel it, but that's the venue you have when you're not with a gallery, or if you don't have exhibitions. Like you still have that opportunity to display your work there, and fortunately it's quite sort of accessible for most people, so you can actually get your work out there without having a show on or without being in a gallery, so you can be your own curator in that sense.
Yeah. I mean, I've got a lot. I've got an exhibition. I'm in an exhibition in Thailand, in Bangkok, which ends tomorrow. And then in March, I have an exhibition called Up and Down, which I've curated, which has been delayed by 2 years because of Corona, which is with 7 Danish jewelry artists and 7 South African jewelry artists. And of course, a project that's very close to my heart. That opens in Copenhagen on the 17th of March, and then it's going to be in South Africa in August. And then I'm going to be in a show in Albania in September. And then, I mean, there's lots of things. So, lots of things to look forward to.
All right, so we have to keep up with your webpage and maybe social media. I don't know how.
Yeah, Instagram. Yeah. That's a very good idea.
So let's join you in Instagram first, and then we can see where your steps will lead you.
Yes.
Okay, thank you really a lot for your time.
Thank you.